Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Sande Hart, who's here to share with us her new book, The Liminal Odyssey, The Alchemical Power of the Spaces in Between. So welcome to the show, Sande.
I'm delighted to be here, Marianne. Thank you so much for having me.
Just an honor it is to have you here to talk about your book. I know it's getting such great reviews. What inspired you to write this?
Well, I actually set out to tell a story that I had been urged by friends for about 15 or 20 years to tell about this wild experience I had in 1982 at the Rose Bowl in Southern California, in Pasadena, California. And it was, an interesting story that I thought at best, it was a human interest story. And of course, it would perhaps make something I'd want to share one day, but I just didn't have enough of a story to write. But I kept trying. I kept writing and putting it down, writing and putting it down. Then I finally had something, and then my computer crashed and I lost it. So years later, I tried again. And then I heard this word, liminal, a word that I had never heard before. And this was only a couple of years ago, maybe not even a year and a half ago, perhaps. And I knew it to mean threshold. I knew that it was a clunky word to say, and that there was something I needed to pay attention to. So one day I sit down to try this, my hand at writing this story. And I'm thinking about the threshold, the liminal space, the space between a call to action and the impulse, and then the action to do something about it, which is really what my story was about. And before I knew it, I had a full chapter. And then I started thinking more about it. And before I knew it, 11 more stories poured out of me. And so the inspiration was how it began, but how it ended looked remarkably different. It alchemized through the process of writing the book. And it's alchemizing today. I mean, a year later, it's still unfolding.
Well, how exciting is that? And when you talk about it alchemizing, what does that look like?
To alchemize means to take the properties of what exists and combine them in such a way that it creates something better than it was. So an alchemist, the scientists of our ancestors, would turn metals into gold. They were alchemists. They would take the metals and stir them until they heated to the right degree, and we had gold. And so how do you turn something that may appear to be mundane or inconsequential, or maybe of not great value, and you reconfigure how you're either looking at it or using it or applying it or honoring it even, until it turns to gold? And that's what happened for me. As I started thinking about even that story of what happened in 1982, I started thinking about, wow, that really was miraculous when I could look into those spaces in between, when I was able to go into the liminal space. And I started experiencing that with every one of these stories of my life that I thought were, well, interesting, or one day I'm going to have to write about. And that I had the exact same experience with every one of those stories that at one time looked mundane, but before I knew it, they were miraculous.
I think many people can relate to that, looking back in life going, okay, well, I've had these experiences at the time. Maybe they were challenging or upsetting, but how they made major shifts in a person's life.
Oh, yes. My favorite thing to do in the workshops that I love to give is to map our lives and look at all those moments that were remarkable, or maybe not even noteworthy, but you remember them. So write them down and then start thinking about the experience that came from them and the relationships that were forged, and what those relationships, where those relationships brought you, and what that experience taught you. And just keep diving in and diving in and diving in. And before you know it, you've created this net. When you start drawing lines on the paper, you actually create what is considered an Indra's net. net that spans the vastness of the universe and the connection points between the lines, like a spider's web, are these potent pearls of connection. I can't tell you how many times I've looked back on my life and goes, thank God that punch in the stomach happened. Thank God that heartache or that betrayal happened, or I wouldn't be here. So how can we experience the magic while in the moment of those things happening, as well as looking back and alchemizing the experiences we've had and don't really honor them for the gifts that they've given us?
So I do want to touch on your title again a little bit here. I think a lot of times they understand the meaning, but they're wondering how this could come together
Mm-hmm.
as a theory. So how did that all come together?
As I was writing these stories and thinking about what was going on inside of me, I started making notes of the lessons, the methodologies, the philosophies, the skill sets really that I learned either as a result of that experience or helped me navigate through it, and or would be a great expression of a lesson that I had learned, mostly from the people, the scientists, the theorists, the thought leaders, the indigenous elders, and that taught them to me. And when I stood back and I pulled those skills out and I set them aside to kind of like, well, maybe there's something else here. This, by the way, if you can't tell, this book wrote me and was a process in the making. But as I started to look at these different ingredients, if you will, I took them all and I put them in a petri dish, if you will. And I said, wow, what is it about the sacred art of listening and recognizing our intergenerational trauma and behavior patterns, understanding what the trust frequency is about, understanding what archetypal tendencies I was in at that moment. And I used the maiden, mother, and crone. So I'm naming all of these skills that accompany each chapter. And when I pulled them out, I said, what do they have in common? It wasn't that they had so much in common. It was that they alchemized one another. There was alchemy there when I put them together and I practiced them together, which is what I was doing as I'm writing the book. I'm actually practicing them collectively. They became their own skill set. They became greater than the sum of their parts when they were working together, because you can't, in order to practice awareness, that takes the condition of listening and vice versa. To understand intergenerational patterns, we have to first be prepared in a condition of trust. They all work as building blocks and a support mechanism together. So how does this work in our life in real, how does this really show up in our lives? Take what skill sets that you already have and write them out. Consider some of the skills that I mentioned, such as practicing body awareness, doing some processes on intergenerational behavior patterns, understanding what it means to practice the sacred art of listening, and add that to your unique skill set that you bring, and see what happens when you practice them collectively on a regular basis. What that allows, that condition that occurs, and that when you start practicing, what I started noticing was I was stepping more into those liminal spaces. And now what I thought was sort of the journey of my life has become an odyssey. And therein lies the liminal odyssey, how we use our life and our life circumstances to unfold the magic that's meant for us to embrace, to have, to love, to practice.
I love how in your book you talk about, and to kind of dovetail with what you're saying, how it's really to explore the transformative power of the space between crisis and action. And I think a lot of times people are either in one or the other, not realizing that there's actual space there that brings such wisdom.
Yeah, thank you for pointing directly right to the space, because that's exactly it. It's the sweet spot of where we have choice. Yet, like me, I wasn't very good about slowing down to the speed of awe and wonder about what was going on. Like me, I responded from a very emotional place. And It's gotten me far. I've created an awful lot in my life because I responded spontaneously to the needs that appeared in front of me. I know that not everybody has the propensity, but I realized that when I started practicing the Liminal Odyssey in my own life, that those spaces got wider and bigger. I was able to pause in that space, improving my condition to be able to respond and process what was happening. And yes, between crisis and action, dilemma and choice is really where the rubber meets the road because it's how we go through our day. Are we kind of operating in old patterns of how we respond? Do I operate, and this is what I mean by intergenerational behavior patterns. Am I operating in the same way? Am I responding to an impulse the same way my father did? Do I jump the gun? Do I rage? Or my mother, do I just shut down? So paying attention to that condition of how you respond, whether it serves you or it doesn't, pay attention to it. And remember, you have agency in that moment. But getting there isn't always as easy as it sounds, but it really is, because when you practice it and you do anything repetitively for about 21 days, before you know it, you're like, oh, wow, I really responded differently than I would of a month ago. My husband actually caught me not that long ago. So I'm speaking from experience, and I'm also speaking as a student of this because I'm not 100% there, but I'm noticing it works.
It sounds like this is a lifelong journey in many ways, and you have definitely mastered it. A lot of people get to this place where it's like moment by moment.
It's an odyssey. And when we start thinking of our life as an odyssey, and we start questioning assumptions of how we respond or what we believe or what we think or where we go or what we spend our money on, where our real power is, how we raise our children. If we just stop and question the assumption, it doesn't mean your assumption's wrong, but question it. We owe that to ourselves. It is the greatest gift that we can give to ourselves and to the planet. I caught myself in some pretty unhealthy behaviors. And I thought, wow, it's just the way it is. Well, guess what? It isn't, because we have agency, we have choice. And what really lights me up about this is it doesn't have to be heavy lifting. It can be joyful. I write about Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung as well, being great inspirations for me. In fact, I thought this book was going to fit into the framework of the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell popularized and really made digestible. And yet that's where I got the word Odyssey. It's like, no, it's not just this linear line of experiences and lessons and relationships. It's an Odyssey where we can go anywhere we want with our thoughts, and especially in the Western world, where we have the privilege, especially women have the privilege to make choices for themselves. It can't be more important that we step into that privilege and the responsibility to our place here on this planet. And it's fun. I actually, in my introduction of the book, I actually refer to this as a multisensory and fun-filled exercise into the journey of our life, that we don't miss the mundane treasures meant to be ours, the not-so-secret passage doors or expansive opportunities, the gems that appear at our feet. Every day I was stepping right over them. Even somebody like me who likes to stretch an opportunity, I was even stepping over some wild gems. And then I started noticing synchronicities multiplying, relationships improving, people that don't serve me falling out of my life. And it's still happening today. But it's a very personal odyssey. This book is a suggestive manual. I would never promise to anybody, because I have like 300 books on my bookshelf that promise me that if I do their process, it's going to work. I think it requires a combination of all those things through the lens of my life. And I want the same for my readers, who all have a different culture, a different viewpoint, different experiences, different levels of place in the world, everything, so it's a template. It's really a contemplative template. It helps us, through joy and bliss, really find what is our planetary assignment and have a blast getting there.
I'm sure there are a lot of people that want to sign up for that right now. Like, how do I do that? How do I get there? But you touch on some things that we would think that's pretty, in many ways, are pretty basic, but they're almost life skills that I think we need to relearn when you talk about the sacred art of listening.
Yeah.
That's such a big deal because communication has evolved into another kind of arena. And, communication and listening tend to kind of go out the window sometimes.
Oh, sure. And we've sort of been conditioned to that. We've been conditioned to listen to sound bites 15 seconds now by the commercials we see. Buy our stuff and you'll be happy, rich, thin. We don't have enough time to really stop and think, wait, does that truly make me happy? So we've been conditioned to receive information at the rate of a tsunami coming at us. So we really have been taught not to really stop and contemplate. Kay Lindahl was one of my first mentors in the community building work I did as an interfaith activist of women. She founded the Listening Center. As I say in the book, conjures up an image of a place that you go to learn how to listen, but it's really the center of who we are. And to listen, there's a beautiful poem that she taught me, a quote actually by Douglas Steers. To listen another soul into a condition of discovery and disclosure may almost be the greatest service one human being provides for another. And I get chills. I've got full body right now. I have been in her workshops over the years. I have practiced the skill of the sacred art of listening. Listen for understanding. Pay attention to if we're listening to respond or listen, take that out of your vocabulary right away. And really, when you do that, and when you give these pregnant pauses after someone's done speaking, to really absorb what they're saying, but also let them know that you heard them. Because we're so used to keeping a banter, a pace, a cadence, and if I don't interject, I won't get my voice heard. So there's that condition that exists, but you can actually alchemize an environment by being that listening presence for another and really letting them experience what it's like to be listened to, a condition of discovery and disclosure. And it was the pregnant pause that I always find difficult, that uncomfortable listening, like, am I supposed to be saying something right now? But I got used to it. So listening is really critical, especially when we consider that we only remember about 17% of the information we take in a day, and half of that we remember over time. So we're only really capturing meaningful conversation of about 8% a day. Let's pause on that.
I think we can actually, because if you think about all the information we take in, that is not much.
And how well are we listening? Are we and also how are we listening to ourselves? Right? Are we really giving that same respect and reverence to what our body is saying to us? Are we, if our stomach is hurting when we're hearing information, is that not a glaring sign that we should really pay attention to, what we're hearing? So it works both ways, internally and externally. And the best advice I can give is just practice listening. Just try to listen carefully about what you're hearing and not to be so quick to respond and see what happens.
Well, I love how you talk about, and you touched on this a little bit ago, it's just a lot of the assumptions and the pre-programming that we have grown into with the different families and environments and cultures that we have grown up with. And just the assumptions that we have and how we just take those for granted and perpetuate them as well. Stopping and asking about those, I thought, to be so powerful.
Because I do so much work in the field of women's empowerment, there's an awful lot of talk about patriarchy this is not a gender specific patriarchy. Patriarchy is not gender specific. Let me just make that very clear. It's really a condition of systems of domination, which is another way that we have been duped into believing we don't really have to listen to art, just go buy their stuff. Commercial marketers are extremely talented at that. Yet we're the consumers that part with our dollars. So we do have the more power, especially women who make up more than 85% of the buying decisions. So we are truly rolling this world with our dollars. So give that some thought and time to think about and listen to. The work of Dr. Marianne Eisler, someone else that I've known and worked with and whose books I've read all of her books, she refers to this era that we are in, that we are walking through a domination trance. We've been duped into believing things are a certain way. And yet we are a part, we're an element of our culture and what we believe in. A culture is nothing more than a collective agreement by all of us. So what are we agreeing to? And when we change our assumptions and they're rooted in our highest and deepest value systems of what is right, what makes us whole, and by whole, I mean integrity. And I don't mean that in a moral, judgy way. I mean integrity in terms of our wholeness, what is good for the whole as well. What is good for me is good for you, are the choices I'm making in that integrity. That's what makes up our culture. So we have the absolute privilege and right to create the world that we want to experience. And we do that through our thoughts and our actions and our buying decisions and our behavior. And none of it matters if we're not paying attention to our behavior, which I believe we have to do in those liminal spaces.
You hear of people in business who, after meetings, whether it goes good or bad, they'll get together and think about what happened and kind of take stock of everything that's taken place. And in many ways, it's doing that from moment to moment as we go through our day, right?
Yes, exactly. Let's take the time. We have the time and think of what we're missing when we don't. There's in the book I include, and I've already read this once today to a friend. In the book, I include a message from the 13 Indigenous grandmothers, also many of whom I know and have worked with, that it goes, instead of traveling to a goal out there, you'll voyage deeper into yourself. And that this is part of our DNA. Our mothers knew how to do this. Our grandmothers and grandmothers knew how to do this. Yet here we are. We've forgotten that. We've become separate from even our own good sense, even because do we not trust ourselves? Therein lies the trust frequency, another skill that I could not live without, honestly, or I wouldn't live in my integrity without. But it's really informed me in everything I do, and I'm making better choices, So, yeah, you're right. It's all about stopping throughout our day and paying attention. Even if there's a practice you can do, and to train your brain, which neuroscience has taught us that we can do. And I learned this skill in my early 20s when I was entering into the world of sales. And on the back of Success magazine was a tiny article, How to Stop Procrastination. And it goes like this: 5 times a day for repetitions of 25, say, do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now. And you get that. So every time I was in the shower, every time I got in and out of my car, and I took a shower, these are the things I did every day. I would remember, put a Post-it note up, do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now, do it now. And then before I knew it, I was no longer needing to practice that. I haven't procrastinated in nearly 40 years. I also don't sit very well on the couch. Get up and do it now. But I was creating new neural pathways with that practice. So anything you want to create in your life, you can actually do through neuroplasticity, through a simple practice. Awareness, or better yet, stop 5 times a day and give yourself 25 seconds to tap into how your body is feeling. Just what are you feeling right now in your body? Your arms heavy? Are you sitting comfortably? I can't tell you how often I catch myself not sitting comfortably. And you've got to wonder why. No one's telling me how to sit, So that's a perfect example. How could I go through my day sitting uncomfortably when I have full agency over how I position my body in this chair? So those are the things, the simple little things, they start having a ripple effect, and suddenly you become more aware and start seeing more synchronicities and start noticing new colors and textures and tastes. I mean, it's really remarkable when you start practicing awareness in that way.
So we can practice setting our intention to develop more synchronicities in our life?
Oh, absolutely. And it's really paying attention. It's simply paying attention. A flock of 11 pelicans fly overhead. It's like, okay, let's count them. Oh, 11. Funny. I was just having this conversation with my friend that it was 11:11. And funny, I just bought lunch and it was $11. Yeah, those sort of things start when we give something the care and the thoughtfulness of what we're seeing, even if it seems to have no particular relevance. Pay attention to it. I believe that's how spirit talks to us, through synchronicities and whispers and all other kinds of ways, but definitely through synchronicities.
Earlier, you touched on trust, and I'd love for you to expand on that for our listeners. So what type of role does trust play in all of this?
Oh, I think trust is the bonding agent to all of the skills that we have to practice. Trust that we live in a supportive universe that only has designs for our greatest outcome. Trust that whatever happens to us happens for us, which might be kind of a cliche statement. You might have heard that many times. But when we trust that, trust when you get betrayed or something even devastating happens, as hard as it might be, somewhere in there, find the trust that there's meaning here and that there's a better way of looking at this. Trust that we are here to fulfill our divine assignment. Yeah, we all have a seed in our pocket to nourish, and no one seed is encoded with the same recipe of what that forest of possibilities will be. Trust that, that whoever comes into our life is supposed to come into our life. And for me, where this started really hitting home was when I started practicing that one last element about who comes into our life is really here for us. And if it's an unpleasant experience, it's someone who has hurt you or someone that irritates you or someone who really is unsavory, perhaps they're showing you a lesson, and I trust that they are. And maybe it might even be your shadow side. I'm speaking to myself here. Forgive me for using the word your. And that there is something really potent there. Then when you go through your life and you think about those cracks in your life that have created pain, we fill them with that gold that we've alchemized this experience in, and know that it makes up all of our beautiful parts. It's who we are. That lesson I had to learn, even if I haven't fully grokked what it means, even if the lesson hasn't even really shown itself to me, I can trust that it's making up all of my beautiful parts. It's informing who I am. I could go on and on. You could tell I'm kind of picking up I've got a tailwind now.
I know. Hey, that's a good thing. I can
You're an
see
excellent listener. I'm
you're
sure.
in the groove. You know?
You're really helping me discover and disclose things that are surprising me, which is always so much fun.
Oh, well, this is what this time is all about, is to kind of dive into just the story. And I've really found the Liminal Odyssey to be such an impactful journey for a lot of people who I know you brought up Joseph Campbell's hero's journey.
Mhm.
How is that? How, if someone hasn't really read that, how can they decipher how that works for them?
Well, the hero's journey is pretty much the original contemplative template for our life's journey. And to frame it in a way that I can understand it, if you look at any Disney movie, there's a call to action. Cinderella's got to do something, and she summons some energy to make a difference. And then she meets her mentor, and she gets her support system, and she gets to the ball, and we think it's the mountaintop. And yet there's more wizards and more villains on our path. And so it's this storyline. George Lucas excels in this as well with the Star Wars series, where there's just this sort of trajectory that you can almost count on, in any movie. It can't be the happy ending yet. Some shoe's going to drop, literally. And there's going to be more heartache. There's going to be more valleys to traverse. And then we get to the end of our story and hopefully a happy ending. And so there is a series, Joseph Campbell breaks it down. I've seen it anywhere between 8 or 11 steps that are predictable in our life. And yet, like I said earlier, I thought that, I'm writing this book. I thought, well, maybe, there's something here. Maybe I'm going to look at my life through the Liminal Odyssey, the hero's journey, or the shero's journey, which is similar as well. There have been many approaches to that, it being a spiral rather than a linear line, like Joseph Campbell shows us. Yet neither hit the mark for me. There was something in between that was missing. There wasn't anything said about what do we do with when the shoe drops? How do we navigate that? What do we make of it? How much time are we wasting and, crumbling to the floor because it happened? And what will these skills help us navigate through this space? So that is where I'm like, okay, I can't really touch or draw out what that journey looks like. And then I got the vision of thinking about George Lucas. And those are, those scenes, the first time we ever saw that Star Wars opening, the opening of Star Wars, and the first time we ever get the concept of a spaceship going through the absolute vastness of the universe and turning left or turning right. And it just there was a whole different paradigm, no matter what direction you turned. And it was like the Wild West, the wild frontier. There was wide open spaces everywhere. So how do you draw that? You can't write that out on a piece of paper and say, here's how the liminal journey goes. It's truly an odyssey. And it's time, and it's okay not to be able to fully articulate it, because I believe these times are calling for new creativity in how we think. And I know that physicists are exploring this new quantum reality as the second quantum revolution. Our minds are speeding up. The pulse of the planet is speeding up. And so our tension is speeding up. Our creative minds are speeding up. If you're out there and you realize, wow, I'm just having all these epiphanies and I'm grasping new concepts, that's part of the evidence of this quantum revolution that we're in. And just kind of bringing it down down to a granular level, that that it's time for new creativity and dropping these structures of the way things used to be. It's part of that assumption, right? Assumption, okay, by now I should be meeting my villain. Oh, I called him into my life. Here he is, Now I should be going to this direction or that direction, or I'm not seeing all the other things in between those steps. So and I hope that Joseph Campbell would be happy about the fact that this concept that he really kind of created the basic framework, the scaffolding for, gave us context, is being stretched and alchemized.
Do you find that sometimes people are like, okay, well, I don't know if I can go into that liminal space because I'm not ready to deal with my family trauma or my traumas. I know all my shadows are there, my shadow side. I don't want to deal with any of that, or I'm afraid to deal with it. Do you get that often?
Well, yes, I do. They're okay with it. I might be here saying, that there could be a shadow side that you're going to want to shine some light on, literally and figuratively. And they're like, no, it's okay. That gives me strength. That protects me. And as long as it works for you, I'm not, I don't have a perspective. I know it works for me. And I know that there are certain relationships in my life that, perfect example, that I actually write about. But I get really vulnerable in this book. I figure if this is my swan song and I want my grandchildren to read it, I want them to know all the dirty details. I left a lot of things out too, but I was not, I didn't hold back on telling some vulnerable stories. And one is that I noticed, and it wasn't that long ago, patterns of relationships that I wondered if I was sabotaging. I kept experiencing the same sort of folk in my life, the same sort of poor behaving people, and working in this peace industry. Why can't we all get along? Because everything I do is on social impact, right? Whether it's a compassion movement or, creating a unified field in the world of humanity, and of course, interfaith work and multicultural work and being allies to peoples of color and all of that, that there's so much, there were so many relationships that were constantly breaking down in sort of the same pattern. And so it wasn't working for me. So I was willing to go there. I needed to. I was tired of blaming others. Or I figured if I'm seeing that same pattern in everybody, what if it were me? What if I was the issue in here? What if I was making this all up? What if I was creating these scenarios and actually sabotaging what happens and leading those relationships in that direction? And I was telling this to a friend of mine, and she had this download, and she turned to me quickly and she says, aha, you need to do some intergenerational trauma work. Something happened in your past, some condition that needs clearing keeps reappearing, so you'll deal with it. And she goes, go home, light a candle. If you have an altar, create an altar, and just start calling in your ancestors, your or whoever your source is, the ascended ones, whoever you may have your source. Or if you don't go there, call in a friend who's passed. Just connect with someone on the other side and start asking questions. And I started asking questions, and I just started, realizing slowly through a process of doing this that there was abandonment in my past, that there was not a sense of feeling like I belonged in any particular group. There was kind of a sense of not feeling enough, which I know is a condition for a lot of women. That's that sense of I'm not enough. And I was certainly the poster child of that. No matter, and in the light of all these great things I'm I'm creating in the world. These organizations that I'm launching that are international and having impact, I still am having this internal crisis. But it was going through that process because I was ready to do it. So I can't judge or suggest to anybody that they should do it, but I sense that the time will come where someone realizes that this isn't working for me. And every book that I have on my shelf isn't working. I'm going to try this one more thing that it's an open space. It's an invitation for you to look at what you've already got, stir it up with a few other skills that I mentioned, or any or all of the ones that I mentioned. And perhaps even told through my own personal stories might be more relatable. And if it helps you, gosh, my angels will do cartwheels, I guarantee you.
Well, that's always good. We like angels doing cartwheels, So- well, it's just interesting when we look at that because sometimes I've heard people say they're afraid of getting into these spaces where they would have to deal with this, but I think you're right, without a doubt. There's so many people that were tired of having things be the way that they've been. So let's change it up.
And ask what you're afraid of. That I write about that in the book. How do you take what feels like this colossal, big, hairy monster that you don't even want to look in the eye and start dismantling it? And you could do that by just and this does take a little courage and a journal and a pen. Why? Well, why? Well, why yourself all the way down the page? What'll happen if I address this? What am I afraid of? Why is that? And just keep writing. No one else has to be done. You can just commit to it. Light a candle. If you want to call in your ascended masters or your elders or your ancestors. I right now have all of my grandparents with me. I can feel I pause because, I always feel them around me because I call them there and I've gotten used to that. And start asking questions like, why? What am I got to be afraid of? I tell the story of zebras in the Serengeti. And a story I used to teach to kids when I was doing these Make a Difference 101 classes. And these scientists set up on a hill to study the behavior patterns of zebras in the Serengeti. And they noticed that zebras will all hang out together in a pack. So to a lion, they look like one massive animal, too big to take on. But as soon as they step away from their protective herd, from the safety net of that fear, that relates to the safety net of that big hairy monster, because their safety and fear is slippery that way. It's gonna create a big hairy monster for you. So it's not going to make it easy to dismantle it. But as soon as you do, you crack the code, and now you've got a bite-size something to, really work with. And then it's not so scary. Then it doesn't hurt so much. And then you start seeing your life alchemizing and patterns start changing. But as far as the zebras are concerned, the scientists couldn't get a good read because they couldn't make out one zebra from the next. And so the story goes, this might be an urban myth, I don't know, but I love the story that they painted a big red spot on this. They marked the zebra so they could identify him. And now this zebra has been identified. It's bite-sized now. It can be identified different from that big hairy monster, and it can be, it could be attacked and eaten. And that's what in the story they discovered. So that's the story of the zebras in the Serengeti. But remember that fear is what we make of it. And it can be slippery, and it's going to pull out as much of your good senses from you as it can, because it wants to keep you there. And but as soon as you say, "Not today, Satan," and you start pulling it apart, remember you have agency. It becomes bite size and not so scary.
Well, I just love how you talk about making your experience an experiment, and that's what this sounds like
Mhm.
here.
That's what it is. If you look at it that way, you kind of separate yourself from it because that gets the ego out of it. That gets the fear out of it, right? Um, yeah. Separate yourself from that fear and that concern or what could happen. And let's practice these things. Practice paying attention. I think that that is probably the fastest way to build muscle capacity for strengthening all. I said that the trust frequency is the bonding agent. I think that awareness is the activating yeast for this recipe. And they work so brilliantly together.
Sandy, what do you want readers and listeners to take away from your book?
Mm. I hope that they start honoring their own stories as really valuable. I hope that my readers, who I consider my accountability partners, because when I wrote this, I wrote it for them, but I had to be perfectly in my impeccability and my integrity because I knew that I just knew that this was something very important. I want my readers to start exploring your planetary gifts. What are you here to do? What can only you do? Aristotle referred to it as our calling, where your passions meet the needs in the world. What are those things? And what are you good at? And again, what can only you do? Do that. And what does it take to get there fully? I think requires us to get out of the way of old patterns that no longer serve us and start paying attention to those cracks and those pelicans and those signs, and with a sense of awe and wonder about it all, and practice bliss. Oh, we have gotten so serious, and this work is important, but it's not heavy. My best friend since high school has got this silliest way of looking at life. And she's successful. She's effective. She gets stuff done. She's responsible. She's an excellent mother and grandmother and wife and best friend. And yet everything is silly. And, everything doesn't have to be so heavy. Yeah, we have a lot of threats going on, especially in this country of the United States of America. We've got a lot to be concerned about, but let's not let it get the best of us, literally. Let's march forward. We have our sacred marching orders. We know voting is important. We know our dollar matters. We know the way we treat one another on the street and our family and what we teach our children matters. So add more ingredients of love and joy in your life while you're looking and discovering or fully living your divine assignment. That was a lot.
That is really important. I love it. And I would be remiss if we didn't also, your book cover's very stunning. I know that Catherine Skaggs is the artist, and it really pulls together that space of Liminal Odyssey. I really thought that really brought the book together as well too. It's a very great compliment.
Thank you. Catherine Skaggs is an incredible artist, shaman, healer, sage, which is the name of her book as well. And this is simply a focus in on a bigger piece that she painted called Luna Solar Tara is the name of this piece. And so I really immediately saw what you see on the book cover now. But again, it's only the face of a full figure, or at least from the bust up.
Wow, she does such amazing work. Sandy, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Thank you. Well, there's liminalodyssey.com. The women's interfaith work that I do in the world is Sarah4hope.org, or you can just get everything at sandehart.com.
Well, Sandy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Marianne, thank you so much for your exceptional listening skills.
Well, thank you, Sandy. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Liminal Odyssey. So, do you have a small business or book that you think should be on the radio? And the social media algorithms have changed so much that you just can't connect with your target market? Well, you're not alone. That's why so many people are choosing to advertise on radio. KMET is part of the 25th largest U.S. radio market in Southern California. The Moments with Marianne radio show is also available everywhere online after it airs on KMET. With over 800 episodes available, downloaded in over 78 countries, we're the #1 choice for advertising books and small businesses. So visit my website at mariannepastana.com for more information on how you can advertise on KMET AM/FM. Well, we're going to pause here for a quick moment. We'll be right back after these messages. I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.